So welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ellie Amador and I'll be your host. I work for the University of Tennessee System and I am one of the organizers of the Pandemic to Possibility webinar series. While the pandemic has caused great adversity, it's also led to great innovation. And sharing these success stories in hopes of inspiring more collaboration and momentum is why we created the series. We're grateful to our partners at the Tennessee Chamber and Alliance for Better Nonprofits for making today possible. We're also grateful to our speakers for dedicating their time and sharing their expertise. Before I introduce them, let me spotlight you for a moment. We have almost 100 people registered to attend today. You represent a wide range of organizations, including, for example, FedEx, Habitat for Humanity, Girls Inc. of the Tennessee Valley, the Tennessee Language Center, the Metro Drug Coalition, and the town of Spring City, just to name a few. If I could ask you to use the chat feature and let us know the other organizations that are represented that I did not mention, we would love to have some engagement and see the wide range of nonprofits and organizations and corporations coming together today. So I'll pause for just a second and ask you to use our chat feature. All right, so this afternoon we are presenting a session focused on mental health amid the pandemic. Today you're going to learn the toll the pandemic is taking on employees. There we go. The toll the pandemic is taking on employees, how factors such as stress and uncertainty impact the body, short and long-term changes employers should be considering, resources available to leaders to better support the needs of employees and the workforce. Just two housekeeping points before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and I will bring them up during the Q&A following the presentation. Also, we are recording this session so that we can share it with everyone after this session this afternoon that's live. And of course, we expect everyone to follow a code of conduct that is outlined on the webinar website, which is webinars.tennessee.edu. With that, allow me to introduce our presenters. We have with us today Sarah Ransom. Sarah works for UT Extension as a family and consumer science and 4-H agent, overseeing the Johnson County Extension Office. Her current responsibilities include educating the community on healthy living, nutrition, parenting, interpersonal relationships, financing, and working with youth. From UT, we also have Heather Sedges. Heather is an associate professor of human development in the Family and Consumer Sciences Department with the UT Extension. Her expertise helps individuals and communities better understand the how and why of interactions from a brain-based perspective. And finally, we have Monty Burks. Monty serves as the Director of Faith-Based Initiatives for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. In this role, he engages and connects Tennessee's faith communities to the behavioral healthcare system with the goal of expanding addiction and mental health support services across the state. So I'm going to give an out loud round of applause to all of our presenters. I hope you'll do a little sign of support for them as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to get us started.
All right, well, good afternoon, and we are so glad to have you guys joining us. I think I can truly share on behalf of everybody that we're super excited to share with you all today. But I wanted to let you know to get started, we're going to be talking about some really great topics today, COVID, emotions, mental health, so nothing too complicated. We wanted to keep it, real light and easy on this fine Tuesday afternoon. So our first slide, we're going to discuss some of the fears, the feelings that people have been going through over this last course of the year. But with any form of change, there's always a variety of emotions that people are going to be experiencing. From the start of the year, everyone's attention is very quickly grabbed by COVID-19. And the world very quickly started scrambling to make fast decisions, fast changes to try and, make sense and protect those that are closest to us. As these changes occurred, and as these changes continue to occur, we're experiencing a wide variety of emotions. So in my line of work, working in a county-based office, I get the opportunity to see and talk to, interact with many business owners and leaders in our community. And I've found across the board, regardless of zip code or what industry, faith-based, production, farming, agriculture, whatever the industry is, the emotions that are being experienced are very similar across the board. So the focus today on our webinar is, of course, COVID, mental health, and the role of employers. But these emotions are also going to be impacting our families, our friends, our staff, our clients, and ourselves. So in talking with individuals, as I started working on this presentation, I would just take notes on what they said. The key words that they said are what you see on your screen in that word cloud. You'll note the biggest ones were the most commonly mentioned ones. And the two big ones are fear and uncertainty. These words were spoken by almost every individual that I talked to. So as you think about your last journey over the last 9 months, and you look at this list, do you identify with any of these emotions? If you see an emotion that isn't listed that you've experienced during this time, feel free to type that in the chat, because there's always a variety of emotional words that we can use. The good news with all this is you're not alone. As an employer, you're not alone. As an individual, you're not alone. So while the general public is dealing with all of these fears, as an employer, we get to face all of these personally and more. As a new boss myself, I came into this role at the beginning of 2021. I'm getting a front seat experience to what dealing with all of these emotions and mental health and COVID, what that looks like from an employer perspective. Not only are we responsible for our own emotions and how we handle the situation, but we have our staff members, we have the general public, we also have other bosses looking to us going, who's going to lead? How do you make these decisions? What's the best thing for everybody? So we're all dealing with these struggles of isolation, missing our individuals, as we've all gone to work from home, that's been different, and struggling to find new work routines, trying to keep others safe while making sure that workload is still getting accomplished, and recognizing that we don't have all the answers in the midst of all of this crazy. We're all trying to figure out what's going on. And so as we come across all of these things, it's important to remember that the people that are struggling, they're just people too. Just like you and me, everyone is going to have day-to-day issues they're dealing with on top of everything that's coming at us. So these are certainly uncertain days for everyone, and everyone is navigating this high intensity in regards to work, health, politics, faith, personal choices, freedoms, and more. The list is endless. So it can be really easy to feel all of these emotions and wonder, what the future is going to bring. So this is the time when we're going to get to see and experience the resiliency that we have as individuals, to recognize that even though emotions are high, even though people are dealing with a lot, we can still work together to overcome anything that we're facing. Today is all about starting that conversation, discovering what the needs are, working together to meet those needs. Heather's going to be sharing more a little bit later about how stress impacts our emotions and ways to engage our emotions and not just be ruled by those. So as we move to looking at what employers are facing, we have this nice long list here. We're facing challenges and obstacles. These are issues that every employer is facing across the nation. We're all handling everyday work functions. We're trying to provide for our employees' needs. And many of the bosses that I've spoken with individually in my community or in neighboring counties and states around me, many bosses have shared that these are some of the most common concerns faced by their employees that they've brought up. So this is something their employees have brought to them and saying, this is what I'm struggling with. Things have gotten real challenging because no longer are individuals physically together. There are no reassuring smiles, no pats on the backs, no hugs that it's going to be okay that are available when major losses or struggles are being faced. Over these last several months with COVID, the workplace has not only shifted in physical location, but in most cases, a lot of these places have gone to completely virtual settings. So this has limited the access while also expanding our access. While it reduced the physical interactions that we could have with our employees, it provided endless opportunities to engage. Remember though, with every change, whether it's positive or negative, The workplace, our employees are turning to their bosses and their supervisors for support and often just the listening ears, all they're looking for. So in addition to all of these interpersonal issues that are up on the screen, employers are working to make sure their employees are provided for, safe. They're trying to adjust workloads to make sure they're manageable, make sure the work is still going to get done. And there have been, concerns across the region throughout the year about having adequate food supply, both now and in the future. And good luck if you were trying to find those cleaning supplies that you needed or your favorite brand of toilet paper. So we've balanced all these decisions to work and protect our staff as much as possible. And it seemed to happen overnight. But leaders in the field had to step up in their roles in the field of uncertainty. But there's always more. And here are more things that employers have reported that their employees have shared with them. Being fairly new myself to the role of boss and manager, I have found immense room for both personal and professional growth in the last 11 months. When I first agreed to take this job, I remember the very first conversation I had with my supervisor when I accepted the position. He told me that in leadership, and specifically in this role, that I was accepting a ride on a roller coaster. And he goes, buckle up. He said, because sometimes things are going to get a little tough. Sometimes they're going to get a little exciting. Sometimes they'll be nice and smooth. And sometimes you might even go for a loop or two. Well, the one thing he didn't tell me was that COVID was coming and that coaster was going to leave the track. So while all of these changes have seemed overwhelming, on top of everything else, all of the adjustments, there have been many positives that have come out of this time of change. Being able to adapt and open new avenues for providing services to our clientele. We're able to impact new audiences. We're able to realize and break barriers and learn, that indeed we can teach an old dog some new tricks. Employers have faced these struggles, but we're also getting a front row seat to impacting more lives and breaking those barriers. So Brian Tracy is a CEO whose company specializes in training and development of individuals within organizations. And he states this quote, "The true test of leadership is how well you function in a crisis." So supervisors and business owners everywhere have gotten to see how good their leadership skills are during this time. They've learned that some have done really well, and then they've also discovered that there's some room for professional development. As we face all of these struggles of unemployment, the fear of unknowns, changes in staffing, quarantines, social media, political drama, education for our kids, mandates, laws, guidelines, protests, division, and community. The list, again, as we've mentioned, the list can be endless. All of this leads back to impacting the mental health of each person. And don't forget you're included in that. Even though the focus of today is a lot about the employer perspective, you still matter. It's like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first and then help others. So individuals in leadership are working to protect their mental health, but also that of their employees, customers, and clients. So in the middle of all this chaos, the leaders have arisen across the state. They've been offering a listening ear, remaining flexible, acknowledging the stress. Everybody, I'm sure, has been on some Zoom meetings now and again. Some have implemented fun photos Zoom day, holding weekly personal check-ins, sharing those words of affirmation, making a few extra phone calls, sharing employee resources and employee assistance programs, sending health tips, and utilizing mental health counselors. One of the business owners in Tennessee shared with us that the increase in just negativity across the nation has been the most difficult and the most challenging thing to overcome. But all of these are ways that employees have risen to make the task to make sure that the health and the well-being of their employees is top priority. Monty's going to be sharing in a little while about some of the great resources that you can implement. Some of these you may already be doing, but some of them may be some new things that you can share with your employees. So remember, as we're starting to head towards hopefully a more normal way of life, we're still in the middle of all of these unknowns and uncertainties. We're still figuring out how to work from the job site or from home. We're approaching the holiday season, which can be really hard for some and really joy-filled for others. And I know in my office, we've just gone through, across the state, we've gone through the time change. And in my office, I've heard all sorts of things about how that's affected sleep cycles. It's changed people's moods. And if you're anything like me, we all are mourning the loss of a few hours of that extra sunlight. For some, these things may be seen as really small changes. But if you talk to a mama whose kids aren't sleeping, or you talk to the individual who just needs that sunlight, you're going to discover that this is a big deal to them. So while some things may seem small, for other people, they're really important and can be life altering. So the struggle is real, and people are facing a variety of issues and challenges. But through this time, we've been able to see the resiliency of the American people, and in truth, the resiliency of the world population. We have refused to give up, we have refused to fold and cave under all the pressures. We've banded together, the communities have gotten stronger, our places of employment have gotten stronger as we've shared the struggle and worked to overcome the challenges. As we've gone through this, many leaders, they shared, my door's always open. We're already doing these tips and tricks. We're already doing a lot of this stuff to help make sure our employees are cared for, make sure they're heard, make sure they're supported. But we've also gotten that chance to learn more about compassion, learning how do we communicate real, honest communication to go through what people are struggling with. It's also important to remember that everyone is not always okay. Maybe they're just the ones that are remaining quiet. They're processing everything alone. They're battling their fears alone. They're thinking through all the possible what ifs alone. Just because someone seems strong or they seem like they have it all together, it doesn't mean that they are. Appearances can be deceiving, and assumptions can get us into a world of trouble. So as an employer, I just really encourage you all to check on all of your people, even the strong ones. So what are some ways that employers across the state have been encouraging coping with stresses, whether it be COVID, isolation, the fears, or just everyday general life? So there are a few things that employers have shared with me and my local community, and then I'm going to turn it over to Heather and Monty to hear about some additional great resources. So on the screen, you'll have a list. I kind of compiled a bunch of them into different sections about different types of things you could do. One employer shared with me when we were discussing this, they said, I strengthened my relationship with God and my family through this time. I realized how much time I wasn't devoting to them. And this was a great time to change that. And so sometimes, even in the midst of all of the chaos, it takes those rough challenges to awaken our souls to the things that are most important. At the beginning of 2020, I had decided that I was going to write down one positive thing that happened every day of 2020. Now, I'll just confess right up front, I have not gotten to every day. Sometimes life gets busy, things happen, and things change. But in the first several months of COVID, as I found myself going, what is happening? Feeling truly like that roller coaster had left the tracks, and just being hit by this wave of nobody knows what's going on. I found myself wondering if anything was going to be normal again. Even grumbling and complaining a few times to some coworkers and family members about how truly terrible 2020 was. But then I stumbled across that list from back in January, pre-COVID. I found that list back in January, and I was kind of surprised to discover that it wasn't full of negatives and horrible things. I found a list of all the wonderful and good things that had happened in the year already. All those fun family moments, or that funny thing that happened at work, or that beautiful sunrise that I'd forgotten about. All of those things, what I found written in that list. So while that simple list didn't make the struggles and the frustrations and the fears go away, it did noticeably decrease that overwhelming sensation, that fear, that concern, and remind me that no matter what's going on, there's always something beautiful to look for in every situation. It just takes some time to look for it. So while these are only a few of the quick and easy things that employers have been doing to protect and enhance not only their emotional health, but their employees, there are many, many more resources that you're going to get to hear about today. So I'm really excited to answer questions that you guys may have later. But for now, we're going to turn you over to Heather to share more about the science behind stress and our reactions.
Well done, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. Something that really stands out to me that you said was how we're not alone. We're all going through all of this together. And so I want to share with you all some of the biologically based, physical based reasons that we really are actually all stressed out right now, that we have been, and why it feels a little bit different right now than maybe in normal times, if you will. So we all have chaotic times in our lives. They come and they go. And when we have situations that elicit some kind of worry or concern, our brains go to work and they try to help us figure out and to tell the rest of our body whether we should freak out or we shouldn't. Okay. So say going to the dentist. For some people, going to the dentist is a freak out, but then they remember that they're going to be okay. Public speaking, for instance, for some people, they really worry about it, but ultimately they know they're going to physically survive this. Now, for some people, cuddling with kittens and enjoying that time, that's a warm and fuzzy. Our brains know where to put those kinds of experiences. It gets down to the root of what we call fight, flight, or freeze reactions to our world. It's just a very efficient way for our brains to respond. So we know based on past experiences that we can either freak out and know it's okay, or not freak out and know everything's going to be all right. But what happens when we encounter something like a pandemic that none of us have ever experienced? Well, when the information's always changing and we weren't too sure, we thought, oh, we'll be fine. Okay, we'll be fine. Oh no, wait, new information. Our brains aren't too sure where to put this. And in the presence of our brains not knowing where and how to categorize concern about something we've never faced before, especially when all the information changes from day to day and evolves over time, it keeps us in this suspended state of animation. And our bodies and our brains don't like that. It kicks up our adrenaline. It makes our heart race a little bit faster. It increases the release of cortisol in our bodies. So if you find that you're either sleeping more or less, or that maybe some of your employees have been a little bit more forgetful lately, or there's some mistakes happening, or even if you feel really sore. I don't know about any of you, but I do this thing when I'm at the computer all day in front of Zoom. And by the end of the day, it's like I've lifted just a ton of bricks. These physical manifestations and expressions are all biologically based. So the idea that some employees may be, unable to handle things, better able to handle things, worse at it, these are all true. But the reality that exists is that every single person has a brain, at least we assume so, and that they're using it. And when it's chaotic, like what we're dealing with now, and everything is changing, every time something changes, our bodies and our brains are reacting. So if something's taking a little bit longer to get done at work, this is one of the reasons. I know your mind is probably blown right this second. And so what do you do with this information? I want you to ultimately know that everything's okay. It's going to be completely okay. There's no need to freak out, because there are techniques that we can use to mitigate the impact of our brains and our bodies feeling overwhelmed and chaotic. As Sarah mentioned earlier, there are self-care techniques, and especially as, like she said, going into the holidays, using some of the techniques that she highlighted, and that we all have resources to share, but really building that toolkit, I think, is a positive moving through this time, because the reality that exists is that we don't get out of this world without some stress. of any scale or scope. We are all going to deal with it of some kind, sometime. So building our toolkit now as we learn how we react to stress is something that we can carry forward, and we can really help our employees really use that toolbox to their benefit over time. So one of the things that has come up repeatedly in the literature and in candid conversations is, why does meeting on Zoom like this, why do we find this a little bit exhausting? What about this whole remote working? Is that more exhausting for some people? Or even going into work, having to wear a mask, having to socially distance. Why is that concerning to us? Again, going back to our brains trying to readjust and understand new ways of doing things. But technologically, there's something happening here. So what we have here is, you'll see productivity on one side and we have technology on the other axis. And we see that some people, like this midline here, start with a basic understanding of technology, right? And their productivity, they're good based on the technology they've had to use. Well, as the need to better understand new technologies and to learn different ways of working in order to meet that same level of productivity before, that leads to cognitive exhaustion, the cognitive demand, the thinking toll of what we are doing, right? The learning of a new technology and then applying it has been shown repeatedly to be mentally taxing. So if you feel exhausted by trying to get your printer to connect so that you could scan something, or trying to figure out DocuSign to get the paperwork processed the way you need to, or why is Zoom not working today, or, why do they want me to use yet another, project management platform, that is real exhaustion. I have a brother-in-law who said to me, well, you're not laying brick. Why are you so exhausted? Here's the reason. Our brain is working just as hard as the rest of our muscles. So be sure to take that into consideration when working with your employees and giving them some time to feel comfortable with technology and as they apply it in new and novel ways. So I wanted to share something that's really coming back to that central theme that you're not alone, and that we all have these brains of ours. So whether it's encountering a new way of doing something through a socially distanced approach or having to use technology, our brains, when they become overwhelmed with lots of new information, they react in a very specific way. And there are two main pieces of our brain. We have three here. The top of your screen there, you see what we call the lizard brain. This is our mammalian brain. This is where it all started for us a long time ago. And we've got this is the brain stem. This is the part of our brain that doesn't need us to continue to control it. This is where we breathe, we get hungry, that sort of thing. The middle part of our brain here is the amygdala. This is where our brain processes whether we should be in fear and be reactive, if we're going to be attacked by a bear, or if, how we should respond. Okay, this is where our emotions happen, our limbic system here. Because it's so closely related to our lizard brain, that central part of our brain, when it perceives a threat, it doesn't say, oh, you know what? That's not such a big deal. I can just react a little bit. Instead, it reacts the same as being attacked by a bear as it does for your slides not working when you're on Zoom in front of 100 people, right? So that same system is going to start processing in the same way. So what do we do about that? Because that's the system that's getting us all revved up. That's where our heart races, we start sweating, we get thirsty, our hands might shake, things like that. What is happening is that flood of cortisol is actually starting to turn off what we call our wizard brain. And that is all of this thinking brain that we have. This is called the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. This is the logical part of our brain. So for instance, say you're driving behind someone and they slam on the brakes. And do you think, oh, I should now slam on my brakes? No, you just hit your brakes right away because that's your reaction time. That came from a fear-based point of view. You reacted and you moved on. Now, after the fact, you might have some feelings and some words for that person, but then you could probably put some logic to it as well, that perhaps they are having a bad day, or they didn't know that the light was about to turn red or something. So trying to make an explanation for that behavior. So if I want to take you all through an activity right now. So we talked about our wizard brain and our lizard brain here. So if everybody will take their hand, you'll hold your hand up for me. We're going to make a brain. Your thumb is now your amygdala and that mammalian reptile brain right there. And then I want you to turn your hand. I'll turn my hand so you can see it. But as you wrap your fingers, the rest of your fingers around, what you're going to see is our wizard brain right here. Okay. So here's our brain stem. Let me get it. I feel like a YouTuber here. Our brain stem here. Here's this central part of our brain and our wizard or our logical thinking brain. What happens when our bodies sense that fear, or they're not sure is everybody wearing a mask here? Was I exposed? Are the sniffles that I'm having, is it COVID? Should I go get a test? What should I do? What happens then is that cortisol that goes through our system, it actually turns off our wizard brain, and we call that flipping your lid. How many times have you been actually like kind of angry at somebody or a little annoyed, and you maybe say something you didn't really mean, or you give a look that you didn't really mean to give, or you toss something off your desk that you didn't really mean to do? That's because our wizard brain is turned off. In order to re-engage it, what we have to do is take a moment and recognize where we are, what's happening, because the moment we start to recognize that we are reacting and start thinking logically, that wizard brain starts to re-engage. Taking a few deep breaths, working through some mindful activities. One of my personal favorites is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You just sit there and you, in your head, name 5 things you see physically around you. So right now I see my mouse, my keyboard, my screen, my webcam, and my glass sitting in front of me. 4 things that you can hear. I can hear my computer whirring, the door shutting upstairs, myself talking, that sort of thing. 3 things that you can feel: your chair, your shirt, my pen. 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So use your 5 senses, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what that does is actually re-engage your mind into the here and the now. Another trick that I like to also use is, it's called square breathing. You breathe in for a count of 3, hold for 2, out for 3. Hold for 2, in, hold, out, in. So, and repeat that, and that can really help your wizard brain start to re-engage. So what do you do now? There's lots of tools that you all can start to share with your employees, start testing out for yourselves to figure out what works. The reality is there's not one standard way for any of us to maintain ourselves during this time and to help others. So we have to figure out what works. There are a lot of great resources out there. And do we have the link there for me to share? So we want to re-engage our wizard brain by just recognizing what and when it's happening. Really define the severity. If it's a really big issue, maybe we need to take a time out for ourselves. Use a strategy that you have on hand and then reset and in order to move on. I also think it's really important that if we mistakenly don't handle something quite the right way or the way we wanted to, that we model for employees and others in our world the ability to ask for a do-over. It's something I actually use as a parent. It's not that we're admitting fault or that we're, doing anything wrong. It's really just sharing with others that we're human and that we're all going through a very unique time right now. As I said, explore resources, figure out what works for you and your employees. I created a little landing page that has resources and links to lots of other things. You'll see a PowerPoint there. And in that PowerPoint, there are hyperlinks to lots of additional resources. Feel free to share this with your employees and with others. And I hope it helps.
Great. We've had two fantastic speakers so far. Before I transition to our third, which is Monty Burks, I want to remind everyone that feel free to use the chat feature as questions come to your mind. And when Monty finishes, we will kind of open to some engagement at that point. I can moderate some questions. If you want to ask a question to me privately, feel free to do that. Or if you want to just turn your video on and raise your hand and speak up, you're welcome to do that too. So, all right, at this point, we're going to turn it over to Monty to talk to us about some changes that leaders and organizations can be making to better support the needs of our employees.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank you all for jumping into this awesome Zoom meeting today so we can talk about mental health and other types of issues and concerns that we have during the COVID pandemic. But just understand that all of these activities that my colleagues Sarah and Heather have talked about are things that we can really transition into our everyday life post-COVID, because we will get post-COVID, but we will still have issues around and concerning mental health diagnosis and substance use disorder diagnosis. So it's really good to have these resources and understand where you can dig and dive to help other people that are around you, employers, where to help employees, where you help other peers, and including the things that you take home to your family and your friends. So I'm going to cover some stuff on resilience and recovery, and my colleagues hit it really well. We talked about different needs and things in the community or the community that you work in. And we also talked about issues with the prefrontal cortex. I am one that is really in awe and then I'm thankful that we have conversations around the brain science behind addiction and other issues so our communities can kind of get a better understanding of what's happening inside a person's brain when a problem occurs. Sometimes people don't understand that things are not necessarily just a choice. Sometimes there are other issues involved, other concepts, other concerns. So really quick, a little bit about my story. I'm a person that's in long-term recovery from substance abuse and a mental health diagnosis. I always like to share this slide at the beginning of my presentations so you can see the transitions that I've made through my life. And the reasoning behind how I've made these transitions is through people and support and community, people who are willing to have uncomfortable conversations with me, allowing me to be vulnerable, and also they were vulnerable themselves. I do a lot of work in this capacity, in my professional capacity, with peers, people who advocate for those who suffer from addiction and have mental health issues. But I am a person that's in long-term recovery. March 3rd will be 21 years free from that bondage. And I also was a person who had a mental health diagnosis and was able to be able to share my story and also practice resilience. So I want to cover a few things in this process so you can kind of understand some things as an employer, as a manager, as a leader that we need to be aware of as we work with our communities. One is understanding trauma. And I like to go into the concept of trauma informed by the 3 E's, 3 E's: event, experience, and effect. Remember, sometimes the way I see things, my perspective is different than yours. Yours is different than mine, and that's okay. We need to understand that people that we work with are not going to all be the same, and there's no cookie cutter approach to recognizing trauma that is in someone else's life or that someone else is dealing with. Individual trauma can result from an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual. It's okay to not be okay, that are physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and have the lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning of mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So trauma can set root in any one of these places in a person's life. And again, these are people that we work with, people that serve with us, serve under us, serve for us, or we work in some kind of quasi capacity with. So understanding that trauma can develop in a person's life, and understanding how we communicate with people can better suit us just in case something arises, a situation arises, or there's an opportunity for an uncomfortable conversation. I know that I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be on Zoom during the COVID pandemic. And I have learned that through Zoom and through WebEx and Teams and all these other just wonderful platforms, that we're going to be able to really reach into more deep pockets of Tennessee and stay connected post-COVID. And I'm thankful for that. So we're still dealing with how to deal with conversations around trauma from Zoom. This is an absolutely wonderful learning experience for me as well as my colleagues. So what is resilience? To be resilient isn't to go back to the way things were before. It is to allow oneself to be changed, to see the cracks in the self or the system, and to let the light shine through and become stronger in the broken places. The reason that I bring up the concept of resilience, because we work with a lot of people who have had some type of traumatic experience, and they walk and breathe in the concept of resilience each day. So these people work with us. We work with you. So understanding that there can be trauma associated with an event that happened in a person's life. And remember, events, how we take events, how things play themselves out in our mind, are how we process. So what we're being resilient with or from or to could be completely different to the person beside me, meaning that Sarah and Heather may not necessarily have the same experience that I did with something in their life, but it could have some significant trauma that has to be dealt with, or I have to be aware of, or they have to be aware of. And again, having these uncomfortable conversations and spaces to talk about this is how we get this information and out, and how we as leaders can really address issues and concerns with our staff, with people that we work with, people that we serve, and as well as customers. What is recovery? Recovery is a process of change through which people improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. So resilience and recovery, very similar concepts, but they're really an evolving concept per person and how the person sees themselves. There are 4 dimensions that support recovery: health, overcoming or managing one's disease. Remember, and from evidence-based practices, let's understand and look at addiction from the concept that addiction is a treatable disease. It's not a moral failing. It's not something that we should put ourselves in a seat of judgment over another human being. It's a treatable disease. Healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. Home, having a stable and safe place to live. Remember, we talked about trauma. Imagine the trauma of someone that works with us, then they go home and they don't have a home to go to. Again, things happen in people's lives and they're taken differently. And sometimes an event or a situation that we might not be able to see past what's in front of us could be something traumatic that another person is dealing with. Purpose, conducting meaningful daily activities and having the independence, income, and resources to participate in society. Again, traumatizing experience, how a person relays information, how a person processes information, and community. Having relationships and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. I'm constantly telling people to build community, and community can look so different in so many different pockets around us, but you have your work community, you have your home community. Sometimes they intermingle, most of the time they don't, but these are still 2 communities that we have to be as in the role of leadership, culturally competent to people that we work with or people that we serve, understanding that everything's not going to be the same. And again, people can perceive an event different. So how they process that might be how they act, or might be how they adjust. The workplace. Recognize issues and potential barriers during COVID-19. We know that we are smack dead in the middle, hopefully on the inside of the middle of a worldwide pandemic. Understanding that people are not able to get out and mingle and release oxytocin through hugs and fellowshipping with other individuals, that we don't really know the potential of the full ramifications of what we're about to deal with. I hope and pray that each one of us post-COVID take all of these resources and really grind in and dive in so we can be a resource for other people when they need help. But to recognize these barriers in the workplace just might be Zoom. It might be WebEx, but still having conversations with people when they exhibit things that may not be necessarily something that we're used to seeing with them. So create a healthy environment where employees can share, safe space to have conversations. And when I say safe space, listen, I'm a person that's in recovery from substance abuse. I need sometimes to have groups. I also need people that I work with to be cognizant and aware of things that may affect me differently than it could affect them or someone else. Cultivate internal leadership to help knock down communication barriers and build access points to healthy conversations. Again, utilizing people that are already on our work team, that are in our workplace, that may have had similar experiences and that may have been vocal or advocated before, might be the special sauce in addressing potential communication barriers and also access points to services. We also have to understand that we as professional practitioners know that there are access points to get services. Sometimes there are invisible barriers between other people and reaching those resources. And one of those barriers is stigma. People may be ashamed or afraid to ask you as a coworker, as a leader, as a champion for them, to be a champion for them. Where are some resources for me? I don't feel good. I'm not okay today. I'm having a moment where I need someone to talk to. It'd be great if all of us really dove in and understood what those resources were and were able to give back to individuals, or we knew those champions that already existed in our workplace. And I'm not going to go over the statistics, but just to let you know that there are champions in your workplace that have lived experience. Understand that just because it didn't happen to me doesn't mean that it didn't happen to you. It's okay to not be okay. In the workplace, we have so many different types of people, so many wonderful, diverse cultures and backgrounds, but understanding that just because something didn't happen to me doesn't mean that it didn't happen to you, or it could be a completely different experience for two entirely different people that work under the same roof. And lastly, promote resilience and respect recovery for individuals in your workplace. Promote resilience and respect recovery. Respect people's space. If for nothing else, if you don't understand, give them the space to have to deal with the things that they deal with and know what the resources are. So what's leadership's role? How do we communicate? Person first language. Put a person before a diagnosis. If you understand that someone is dealing with something, talk to the person in a very empathetic way, an easy way. You don't go to a person, with respect to those who suffer from issues related to diabetes. We wouldn't walk up to a person and say, "Hey, diabetic, how are you doing today?" We want to speak to people in people first, person first language, describing what a person has rather than asserting what a person is. We want to make sure that we understand that concept. It is intended to avoid marginalization and dehumanization. You dehumanize people with words, and how you look at people is how you treat them. So in leadership's role, how you look at people is how you treat them. When discussing people with a chronic illness or disability, you still treat people like people because they are people. So in this process, we want to make sure that in the workplace that we start to look at how to develop these resilient mindsets. And so we can have our team, our work team, our workspace, everyone around us strong enough to communicate in person first language, to understand trauma, to understand resilience, to understand recovery. Build connections. As my colleague said before, online meetings, positive social media interactions. Social media has become a traffic jam of information, of conflicting opinions, and sometimes not so true news. We have to be careful in the connections we build as leadership, as well as articulating that to people that we work with. Wellness, exercise, and reading breaks during lunch. Again, we're working from Zoom. The majority of us are working from home. If we are in the workspace, it would be a great and awesome option to exercise, walk, or read during work breaks. Exercise your mind. You may not necessarily be able to do physical activity, but you can at least exercise your mind. Find purpose, meditate, and pray. Myself, I meditate and pray daily on multiple occasions so I can make better decisions, because I know that I have to deal with thousands of people, and the work that I do may impact even thousands more. And lastly, embrace healthy thoughts, positive self-talk, and remove negative influence. Again, these are conversations that we need to have. Sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations, but in leadership's role, uncomfortable conversations can save people's lives. We just need to be open and vulnerable enough to have those conversations with people and give them the space to talk about what's going on in their life or in their household or in their workspace. Leadership during COVID, stay connected. What happened to you, not what is wrong with you. Understand that people may want to talk to you and they may exhibit something to make you ask a question, but you could ask someone what happened instead of what's wrong with you. The negative correlation or connotation when you say what is wrong with you will make a person tell you nothing. What's wrong with you? That's going to be the knee-jerk reaction. But instead, what happened to you? What's going on with you? Do you need help? Would you like to talk to someone? Because the symptoms of something happening to someone will be an adaptation to trauma. A person may lash out at you for asking a question wrong, not speaking to them in a proper language, or you may re-traumatize a person by something you say by simply not speaking easily with them. And healing this can happen in kind and empathetic relationships, understanding that in leadership's role, all relationships, sometimes they're different, but still there can be empathy involved in any conversation that you have with someone. Understand, it is an individual's experience of the event, not necessarily of the event itself that is traumatizing. Understand that perspectives are different. We are the sum of our experiences. So sometimes how people that are experiencing COVID right now, the two people may experience the exact same event different during COVID. So it's up to us in leadership's role to understand that it's not necessarily the event itself, but it's how people experience the event. Empathy, perspective, see things from their side. Stay out of the seat of judgment. Recognize emotion in other people. Communicate with that recognition and feel with people. Again, ask questions. Listen, it's okay to not be okay. Sometimes though, we as professionals may forget that even out of our professional occupation, our coworkers might need us to ask them a question when we know they're not feeling good, or when we see them exhibit something that we know that's not normal or that's not regular for them and their activity. Again, I'm not defining normal for anyone, but when I have a personal relationship with someone that I work with and I see them exhibit behaviors that are different, not consistent with how they normally act, maybe it's time for me to recognize something is different and ask a question so we can possibly get to a resource. Here are some of our department's resources. The Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services has a myriad of information, as well as access to support programs and access to treatment, recovery support, crisis services. Here's our department website for mental health, substance abuse services, crisis services, and also for faith-based initiatives. I'm the director of faith-based initiatives of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. I work with our faith communities to connect them with all of these resources to build these strategic places across our state to provide resources, specifically in rural Tennessee. Our congregations are very, very actively involved in mental health and substance abuse work. So again, take these resources, please share them with your community and the people that you work with. Here are some hotlines and trusted websites. 855-CRISIS-1, 855-274-7471, or you can text TN to 741-741. That will connect you with a professional, a representative that will reach out to you, and we can deal with issues relating to crisis services. Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789, 1-800-889-9789. Again, that's the Tennessee Red Line. When a person needs help with substance abuse disorder, needs access to recovery support and or treatment, they can reach out to the Red Line and be connected to other services. Also, I shared these websites as well from the governor's office, tn.gov/COVID-19. It's the governor's daily briefings around COVID. And again, behavioral health, COVID-19. And there's also a couple of numbers on here in these slides for you. And for those of you that need any of this information, please reach out to any of my department, email me or anyone, and I can share this information with you. I think these slides will be available to share after this presentation. And here's other helpful resources. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Ellie. And I want to say this: how you look at people is how you treat people. So we have to learn to start looking at people as the wonderful asset to humanity that they are. In leadership's role, it is our job to make sure that we provide wonderful leadership as well as empathy and kindness to our coworkers and to our friends. So I'm thankful to be on this webinar today with Sarah and Heather, and I look forward to answering any questions that you guys send me.
Thank you, Monty, and thank you to Heather and Sarah. I know that I enjoyed and learned quite a lot, and I'm grateful for the expertise that you pulled together this afternoon. At this point, we have plenty of time for questions, and I know that I've seen at least one come in that I'll read in a few minutes. While we're all kind of transitioning our focus, from looking at slides to coming together as a group, I might ask Sarah and then Heather and Monty if you would just maybe share that one takeaway from some of the comments you shared today that you hope that all of our attendees walk away with and remember. Sarah, is there one thing that really sticks out to you?
Sure. As I was thinking over when you asked the question, I'm like, ugh. So mentally sorting through all those notes. Ellie is giving me stress. But just there's hope. That you're not alone, there's hope, and it's all about starting that conversation. I think so often when it comes to mental health, it seems such an overwhelming topic. And it can seem like, where do I start? Where do I begin? But just knowing that sometimes it's the small things like Monty was talking about, asking questions, being there for them, realizing they may need you to ask what's going on. But so I would just say start that conversation, and there's always hope would be my takeaway.
Great. Heather.
Well, mine, I really sat up and started to really think about things when Monty was talking about that we all have different experiences, that while we're all experiencing the pandemic and our brains are all working in the ways that we talked about, that we also are coming with a personal history. And I will share candidly, I have a family member who has a history of trauma from his childhood way back. And the pandemic, he said this recently, he said, the pandemic feels kind of like my mom who never dealt with her addiction issues. And that was really impactful to me. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, it's the uncertainty. I don't know what's next. And that just really resonated for me. So when Monty was talking about what people are bringing to the table as they're dealing with this, I thought that was important.
Monty?
I have two takeaways. One, presenting with Sarah and Heather really reminded me how important it is, Ellie, for all of us to continue to have these conversations. Each one of us shared, we hit the same issue from different angles, and we all have all of these wonderful professionals, and you guys reminded me just how important it is to make sure that I stay up to date in my information and stay up to date with my colleagues, because we never know who we're going to be able to reach. And so I'm thankful for both of you, and I thank you for UT, Ellie. I'm thankful for you guys putting this panel together. The one takeaway that I've really, that really gets to me is through all of our conversations, we all kind of highlighted differently that it's okay to not be okay. It's really okay to not be okay. It's not okay for us to not acknowledge that someone needs help. So I think that the takeaway from this is we have a wealth of new resources that we can share, and we can get those out to people, and we can maybe connect some different communities to get them to be part of the behavioral health conversation. I love the conversations around prefrontal cortex damage and how that can contribute to mental health issues and substance use disorder, and how that really gets involved in a person's long-term recovery, and it deals with resilience. So again, I'm thankful to my colleagues for sharing that information. You ladies rock. I appreciate you.
Fantastic. All right, I am going to read one question that has come in, and if anybody wants to turn on your video, you are welcome to either type your questions, or you're welcome to read them to us as a group and we can discuss. But first up, we have a question for our panelists. How much should we allow the pandemic to alter our expectations for employee productivity and for staff being present at any given moment, given that we are all experiencing consequences of the pandemic, even if at varying degrees?
I guess who's going to jump in first? So I'll start and then they can tag along. Since I'm very new at this, in my office, I deal with, there are 5 of us all together. So we're a very small office. With that being said, we're also a very close office. And so I've had the benefit of knowing most of my coworkers for the last 8 years, some of them since I was young. And it's been really interesting throughout all of this and working and looking at other extension offices. So for those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with Tennessee, UT and TSU Extension, we are a branch of the University of Tennessee that offers research and evidence-based information across the counties. And so there's an office in every county in the state of Tennessee. And so talking with other county directors, it's been really interesting for me to see how much I personally trusted my team to get their job done, how well we did already communicate, and then talking with other county directors there, and they're going, I need reports every day. I need to know what you're doing, every hour, every minute. And then talking with some of their employees that are going, why are they demanding all this stuff? Don't they trust us? And so for me, it gave me a chance to kind of bridge the gap between some of the other employees and my coworkers across the state, as well as with my staff, of going, let's have a conversation. What are the things that we need to get done? As long as you're getting the work done, I'm not worried about it. If the work is not getting done, I think that's a great avenue to have that conversation of what's going on, like what Monty talked about, what's going on, what's preventing you from getting this done. Maybe there's something going on. One of my coworkers has a couple young kids. And so there have been days where I'm like, you know what? Stay near the laptop. If we need you, we'll call you, we'll text you, take the day. And so that's okay. One of the things that I think Extension found out was that we are still productive working from home. And so I think a lot of people, when there is some freedom, and obviously not, take all the holds off, do whatever you want. But when there's some freedom to be flexible with that schedule, recognizing that some days you're going to get that full 8 hours. Some days we walk into the office when we're in the office and you have your, to-do list, but sometimes, you get through one thing. And then that was yesterday for me. I got through one thing and the rest of the afternoon was just chaos after chaos. And it just cycled till the end of the day. And I'm like, I'm glad that's over with. And so I wouldn't say it's changing necessarily expectations, but communicating those. Expectations are what gets us into trouble all the time. And so having that conversation again of, what are we needing done? Keeping up with those deadlines. Deadlines still have to be met. And then giving them the help that they need and having that conversation.
Well said, Sarah. Monty or Heather, is there anything you would add to that?
Exceptionally well said, Sarah. The only thing I would add is to be mindful of patterns of behavior. If you're seeing that an employee is consistently not logging on to a group Zoom call, or not responding to emails after days and days at a time, there may be a reason for that, and it may be a mental health reason. Because we know that one of the things that happens when we're feeling depressed or very anxious is sometimes people disengage. And so it might be worth really taking a concerted effort to say, I've noticed the last 2 weeks you haven't been on our weekly Monday Zoom check-in. I wanted to check in and see what's going on, and taking that approach versus you better be there, this is part of your performance, but really trying to have that empathetic way of understanding. So I would look for behavior patterns, what is typical, what is not typical. And if something's not typical, investigating it a little bit. There's always going to be exceptions. As a mother that had a child homeschooling at the beginning of all of this. It was a wild ride, and I am grateful for the exceptions that were made at certain times. So yeah, just that.
And lastly, I'll follow up with my colleagues. I think you're right. Watch for patterns of disengagement. You know, Zoom platforms, you know, being able to see everybody's face, putting a face with it, a family with it. I have seen so many beautiful children fly by the Zoom screen in the course of the last few months that it really reminded me of humanity, of how beautiful it is to see our families. And I think that that's okay. I have a large team, and if we try to figure out innovative ways to stay engaged, and I would say to all of our leadership on this Zoom meeting that if you have staff, and find a way to engage with them, understanding that there may be something else going on that you can't see because you're not up close to them. So figure out an innovative way to engage, maybe even explain to them that they can provide a background screen for a Zoom meeting and just be on there and put it on mute, just so we can know that they're there. And again, Heather said it, there may be a mental health concern. Isolation, social isolation causes a lot of things to happen to people. Our species are made to contact and connect with people, and not being given that space to connect with people. Sometimes people disengage. So maybe it's incumbent on us as leadership to take that extra step to just reach out, maybe even redelegate some authority to some other people, not necessarily authority, but redelegate some assignments to make sure that they connect with people. One of my colleagues, Melvin Smith, is on this Zoom, and Melvin and I have worked together for years. If Melvin and I don't see somebody engaging, or we don't hear from somebody, we make sure that we reach out to them, and we work in the same division, two entirely different pieces. But we always like, hey, have you seen such and such? Or have you talked to such and such? And then we'll reach out to them. You know how empowering it is when people know that they're loved by their team. When you just pick up the phone and call, say, hey, how are you doing? That might be all they need. They might not even answer your text message for 2 days. That's okay. I'm good with that. At least I can see red, and they might eventually hit me back. But that's all I've got after my wonderful colleagues. And thank you to both for answering that question that way.
Fantastic. If I have missed your question, please let me know. But I don't see that we have had any other questions voiced. We have some praise thrown out. Teddy Kiefer has said that this is an awesome presentation and will help so many people. Thank you. Melvin threw out his compliments for the panelists, as well as Amanda. If there's anything else that you would like to share or like for us to discuss, I know we have a few minutes. I'll just point out along the housekeeping lines, we are recording this session. We will send it off for transcription and trimming, and then we'll post it on our pandemic website. Once that's done, you'll get an email from me letting you know that it is up for continued viewing and repeat viewing, and then all of those great links and resources that were embedded throughout the PowerPoint, and including the one that we had a little correction on. We'll put all that on the website. And like I said, you'll get an email from me once it's up and ready. So I don't want anybody to have more mental stress, feeling like you didn't get a capture URL that you wanted. We'll deliver that right to you. All right. Well, unless anyone wants to ask for anything else, we'll let you get back to your afternoon. And again, on behalf of the University in Tennessee and our partners and the organizations that our speakers represent, we thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we're glad that you found the content helpful.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you. Hi, Corey.